Just before we get started, I don't have many privileges as the pastor here that I like to just hold on to, but this is one of them. And so I just want to push pause for a second. My father is awaiting open heart surgery, which is probably going to happen tomorrow. And so he is watching online from the hospital. So I want to say, hey, Dad, I love you. And I've been praying for you all weekend. And I'm sure these folks, his name is Mike, I'm sure you will join me in praying for him. Not at this moment, but anytime you think of it this week. So, Dad, love you. Amy Joe, love you. See y'all soon. Christmas, right? Christmas. When you think through Christmas, in my mind, I try to walk through Christmas morning a little bit. And when I was little, if you got to go back to like 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, when you go back to those moments in your Christmas memories, can you remember what it was like to go to sleep? You know, to go to sleep or attempt to go to sleep the night before Christmas. Do you remember those moments? Do you remember what it was like? I remember that as soon as Christmas was over, I couldn't wait for Christmas to be back. You know, like Christmas morning is done. We've done the presents. Now for our family, oftentimes we would have Christmas Day, and then extended family would gather all the way through New Year's Day. And so we would even get together then and do Christmas. But as soon as New Year's Day was over, that was the end of Christmas for us. And so it was like, okay, well, when is Christmas coming again? Like, can we do this? Like, it was so much fun. Like, our families, like all the things that we did, and the presents, those were incredible. Can we do this again really quick? And as a little kid, I was like, how much longer till Christmas happens? And you don't understand months as a tiny one, or days or seasons. So it's just like, Christmas should be here already. And so I started marking it by the time that I got costumes. So when I got a Halloween costume, I knew Christmas is close. Right, so as soon as Halloween is done, it's like, all right, it's Christmas. How many days do we have? How many days do we have till Christmas? And then as we got closer and closer, man, the anticipation just mounts. You know, I mean, like it's just building up inside of you, and you finally get to Christmas Eve, and it's the night before Christmas, and it's time to go to bed, and you're just like sitting there, and your fingers are like doing this. You know what I'm talking about? You know, wait for tomorrow. You know, those moments. I wanted to get up in the middle of the night so I could see Santa Claus. Like I wanted to wake up and catch him, but I was scared to death he would take me with him through that little chimney. We didn't have a chimney, so I don't know how he was getting out, but for sure enough, I was for sure he might put me in the bag and I would be gone, and then nobody would know where I went. So I never left my room, but I was always trying to listen, like, is he here? Do I hear some reindeer? Like, what's going on here? Let me into this. I remember one of my most memorable gifts that I ever got on Christmas morning. I was probably 7, maybe, 6, 7, 8 years old. Nah, I couldn't have been 8. 6 or 7 years old. And I got this G.I. Joe sword. It was incredible. You can wear it on your hip. You know, you can pull it out and you can do G.I. Joe sword type stuff with it. The cool thing about this G.I. Joe sword is not only was it usable for me to play with it when I was the G.I. Joe, it also was usable when I had my little G.I. Joes. And so the sword had these little kickstand legs that came out of the sword, and it became a fort or like a fortress tower for my G.I. Joes. And so when I was G.I. Joe, I was like, let's go. And then when I had my little G.I. Joes, they were like jumping off this thing, and they were like getting all over Snake Eyes and all those things. Like that was what was happening in my world. And I'll never forget it, man. I have no idea where that toy went. As a parent now, I'm pretty sure that it was purged. It was put in a bag that at some point my parents said, oh, yeah, we're going to put these toys aside for later, and which I know now as a parent means that they were given away to someone else like Goodwill, or it's just gone, or maybe just the dumpster fairies. I don't know. But that toy disappeared. I have no idea. I didn't lose it for sure. I wouldn't do such a thing. But that toy is gone, and I have no idea where it went or how it ever just disappeared, but it's completely gone. When we think through Christmas, and I walk through the anticipation of Christmas, even now as an adult, I get pumped for Christmas morning. There are few things better than watching my kids light up because we put thought into what we have accumulated for them, right? It's like I just enjoy those moments, right? When they open, like, wow, this is incredible, you know? And my heart dips a little bit on those mornings when I get it wrong. And they're like, man, this is incredible. And then they play with the box. You know what I'm talking about? Like man, this would have been so much cheaper if I had just gone to Walmart out back and just grabbed some boxes and taped them together, right? Y'all been there. Anticipating Christmas is just part of the season. Kind of adds to the day. There's a crew that we want to look at in the Bible that they're anticipating Christmas. And the anticipation has built with this crew for some time. And I just want you to kind of hear how they respond and how they react when Christmas finally shows up. This crew actually waited about 400 years. 400 years they're waiting for Christmas. Generation after generation, they were telling the story and they were sharing the anticipation of Christmas coming, of Messiah coming, of Jesus coming, of this Savior, the Son of God, this thing that was going to usher them into a new reality. And for generations, they had been waiting. We find this story written by a really close friend of Jesus named Matthew. Matthew was one of the inner circle that Jesus had. And Matthew didn't grow up with Jesus. Jesus met Matthew as an adult. Matthew was a tax collector. So he was employed by the Roman government, which occupied Jerusalem, which is where Jesus was. And so Rome, for sure, when in terms of occupation, like they owned all of the land. It all belonged to them as a part of the Roman Empire. And so, but the way that Rome operated is they still let these little subcultures kind of exist in their own way, and they allowed them to interact and have their own religion. However, you still had to pay taxes to Caesar. You had to give Rome their piece of it. And so, for sure enough, that's what Matthew did. He was a Jewish man who was employed by the Roman government to collect taxes. And he was allowed to take more than that was actually owed. Anything he could take over top of that, he was allowed to keep. And so he was a pretty wealthy man, an educated man. And Jesus comes along and he takes someone that most of people, just like today, people aren't huge fans of the tax man. They were not huge fans of the tax man then. And he takes him, he invites him in to be one of his close friends. And Matthew does. It changes his life radically. And Matthew recounts a number of the moments in the life of Jesus and stories that Jesus has told. And he writes it all down for us in a book that it has his name on it, Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew. And so Matthew actually gives us some pretty good insight into this Christmas moment. We find it in Matthew chapter 2, and I'll start in verse 1. It says this: after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. So that's our setting. There's a few key things, three things that we need to make sure we kind of zero in here. The very first thing is that it's very clearly after Jesus has been born. And so this is not the night that the shepherds show up, if you're familiar with the Christmas story. This is not that. This is after Jesus has been born. The second important piece of the setting is that it's King Herod. Now, King Herod is pretty significant in this particular piece of the narrative and the history of the people of God and the Jews. King Herod was not a very well-liked king. And one of the biggest reasons that he wasn't well-liked is because he wasn't a legit Jewish king. For the Jews, they wanted kings to come from the line of David. David was their greatest king. And so from his lineage, they wanted all those kings to come from David. Well, it just so happens that Herod wasn't even a Jew at all. He was a Jew in terms of religion, but not in terms of nationality. And so he was appointed king by Rome. And so Rome, they knew that they didn't need legitimate kings from the Davidic line up in Jerusalem because that might cause riot and revolt. They needed someone they can control. They needed a puppet king, and that's what Herod was. And so everybody knew that when Herod said anything, it was only because Rome had their hand up his rear end, making his mouth move. That was the way they did it. He was just a puppet king. He was nobody. And so he didn't have a lot of authority. People didn't respect him. He wasn't of the Davidic line. He didn't have the Jews' interest at heart, the people of God's interest at heart. He had Rome's interest at heart. And so he did what he had to do to make Rome feel like Rome needed to feel to keep himself in power. And so this is the king that's in charge when all of this begins to happen. The third piece of context we need to understand is this word magi. It says, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. Now, we've got songs about this particular moment. Magi is not in those songs. We have things like "We Three Kings of Orient" are like that. Or we have songs and verbiage about the wise men. So we call them kings, we call them wise men, we call them, or Matthew calls them magi. So what's the difference? And how those three things sound like very different things. In fact, there's even some translations of the Bible that call them astronomers. So where did all of these things come from? Well, let's start with the beginning. First of all, the Greek word, which is what the New Testament is written in, is in Greek. The Greek word for what we see as magi today gives us our English word magic. Which that's a pretty easy leap. Like, okay, the Greek word gives us magic. That makes sense. But Matthew wasn't writing about these magi in terms of them being able to do card tricks and those kind of things. And no, when he uses that term that we get the term magic, it was more of how they understood phenomena and astronomical events that were happening in the stars and the heavens. They would watch the alignment of planets and stars, and they would predict things that would come true, and they would kind of look for stars and then kind of use that sense of telling this is the story of the world. And that was the magic that Matthew responds to. When we kind of look at the idea of wise men, okay, well, where did we get wise? How do we go from magi to wise men? Well, people that would typically look at stars and study the phenomena that would happen in the heavens, they were typically advisors to royals. And so that's where this wise men thing comes from, is, well, they must have been advisors from a king. And maybe a king sent them as an entourage, as a place of blessing. We know that these wise men, these magi, brought gifts. And so over time, people started referring to them not as the word that isn't an English word at all. This magi it's not an English, magi is not English in and of itself at all. It's from that original Greek. They said, well, something that makes a little more sense to people who read in English, wise men makes more sense. Well, if they're wise men, how are they kings? Well, there's a prophecy in Psalms that says that there will be kings that come and bow down before him. And now, Matthew doesn't tell us that they were kings. It's just that over time, people have said, well, maybe they were kings. They had gifts of kings, and so maybe they were kings. We still don't know. All we do know is that Matthew, who has a personal relationship with Jesus, said they're magi. Well, that still brings us to the last conclusion. Well, how do we get from a Greek word that means magic to magi? Well, it just so happens in the 4th century, we translated the Bible from Greek to Latin. And Latin is where we get the word magi. And so when you hear the word magi, it's the Latin version of the Greek word that means magic. And all of that just means, it doesn't mean a hill of beans and nothing, other than, I think it's just safe to see what Matthew said. Magi showed up from the east. We good? Perfect. He says they came from the east. We don't know where. We have no idea. Our best guess is probably the Persian Empire. A city like Babylon, for instance, was a part of the Persian Empire. For sure, if they were from Babylon, they would have had some instincts or some context about the Jewish religion. There was a pretty decent-sized Jewish community in Babylon. Hundreds of years prior to, the Jews were exiled to Babylon, and some of those people stayed in Babylon even after they were allowed to go back. They just stayed and made lives there. And so there's a possibility there was some knowledge shared, but we really just don't know. All we know is that Matthew calls them magi, and they're from the east. Verse 2. Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him. And so this magi, whatever they are, whoever they are, they've got some clout, because this verse picks up in a conversation they're having with King Herod. This is what they ask. They come to Jerusalem, they go to Herod, somehow they get an audience with the king. So I don't know if they had to pay a little bit of money to get in there. I don't know if they made an appointment ahead of time. All we know is that for sure, when they get there, he takes them and has audience with them. And they say, hey, where's this king? Where's this king that's been born? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Now, around this particular time and this particular section of history, people believed that when a royal was born, there would be a star that went along with that birth in the sky. And so they would always find new stars when a new king or a prince or a queen was born. And so for sure, they saw a new star, and so they said, hey, there's got to be a new king born. And so what we don't have is, how did they know there was going to be a new king born in Jerusalem? Now, what our tradition that we typically tell kids is that these wise men followed the star to Jerusalem and then all the way to where Jesus was. But that's not actually what Matthew says at all. And Matthew actually says they saw the star and then they just went to Jerusalem. But the star didn't take them to Jesus. They weren't following the star to get to Jesus, or they wouldn't have gone to Herod to say, hey, where is the kid? Right? But where is the king? They saw the star, and the star gave them this awareness that, hey, there was a king born of the Jews. Go to Jerusalem. And so that's what they do. And when they get there, they say, hey, we saw a star. We have no idea where this king is. Surely you do, because you're the king, right? And so that's what they begin saying. That, hey, surely you know where this king is. You're the king now. You know where the new king is going to be, right? Verse 3, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. So he's got these foreigners that have showed up, these outsiders that have shown up, and they're like, hey, we saw this star, and we've gathered there's a new king that's been born for the Jews. So we figured you know where it is. Can you point us in his direction? And King Herod's response is he was disturbed. Now that makes sense to me because King Herod, he knows that he's illegitimate. He knows that if there is going to be a legit king of the Jews, that he's in trouble, right? Because he knows nobody likes him. And everybody understands that he is out for him and his own little kingdom that he's got because Rome has handed it to him. So he knows for sure that he's in trouble. And so I get that he's disturbed. What seems strange to me is that it says not only was he disturbed, it says, and all of Jerusalem was disturbed with him. Jerusalem, what? I thought we've been waiting on Christmas for 400 years. What do you mean you're disturbed? You don't like the king. You realize that this king is illegitimate. He's not the king that God has promised. He's not from the line of David. He is not anything that's just been promised to you. You're living under Roman oppression. And so now a Messiah shows up. These outsiders say, hey, there's been a king born, a new king, and you are disturbed by it? Just like Herod is? Man, what happened? I thought this would be like Christmas morning, where you run to go and find something that you've been waiting to take hold of, where there's been an enormous amount of anticipation, but instead you're disturbed when you hear the news. What's also crazy is they didn't even know. Jesus had been born, and they didn't know. They had to have people from another country come to their country and tell them, a new king has been born. Herod and Jerusalem didn't know. Verse 4. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. And this also blows my mind. So you'd think if after 400 years they're waiting for this Messiah, you would think that all people who are Jewish, good Jews that are still interested in understanding, which all Jewish people, especially in Jerusalem, the temple was there, you would think they would be talking about these prophecies that say, hey, eventually the Messiah is going to come. So that when it happened to come, everybody would be like, hey, we know exactly where this is happening, right? Because there are prophecies that have said this is what's going to happen. King Herod has no idea. He's like, well, so these foreigners show up and say, hey, there's been a king born. Where is he at? And so he's like, I got to check with the guys who actually know the Bible. Let me go check with them and see where people said this is supposed to happen. Hold on, TV timeout. And he gathers his crew together, his advisors, his wise men. And he said, hey, this guy told me these guys are here. They've got fancy gifts. And they say there's a king because there's a star. And where is this supposed to happen? And then the scholars, they look at him and say, well, the prophet Micah from 400 years ago told us it's going to happen in Bethlehem. Bethlehem. 400 years ago, this prophet writes down in paper for everyone to see for all eternity, hey, when this happens, it's going to happen in Bethlehem. Now, to give you an idea of just how crazy that is, Bethlehem is like, it's like Noonan was to Atlanta like 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago. Like, I mean, it's a city, like it's on the map, but it's not, like it's just this tiny little thing. There's nothing else there. Like there's a few people, but there's nothing else happening there, right? And that's where it is. Bethlehem is about 6.5 miles or so southwest of Jerusalem. So it's this teeny tiny little know-nothing town. And so for a prophet to say, hey, here's the deal. The Messiah is going to come and it's going to be born in this teeny tiny little itty-bitty, nobody thinks about you town, right? Compared to this big 400 years in advance. That's mind-blowing. That's a detail you don't miss. But he has to go to him. It's like, hey, where is this happening again, right? Bethlehem. Oh, Bethlehem. That's right. Bethlehem. And so then verse 7 happens. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." Now what's interesting is that Herod has to have a secret meeting. He calls the Magi back after he gets the town. He calls the Magi back and says, hey, let's talk. Let's private between me and you. So I want you to go find this kid. And then will you let me know? Because I want to worship him too. Like I want to do this as well. And he sends him to Bethlehem. Why is he doing this in secret? Why is this? Why is it on the hush-hush? Right? Why is this happening? You see, if we fast forward, we kind of learn that he's got a little bit of a plot that's happening. You see, Herod is super insecure because he knows he's illegitimate. And so he's already making steps to make sure that he can eliminate this new king, if there is one. What we come to learn is that he ends up murdering all of the kids 2 years and under to make sure that he can wipe Jesus, which he doesn't even know his name is Jesus, but he can get rid of him. Because he wants to eliminate any threat to his own lineage, his own line, his own kingdom. But he don't want to say that out loud yet. So he sends the Magi on this mission with the intent of, let me know, because I'll be right behind you. So we fast forward. It says, verse 9. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. Now this is where the star leads them to Jesus, right? The star appears, they go to Jerusalem because they know there'll be a new king in Jerusalem. This is where the star begins leading them to the actual place where Jesus is. From Jerusalem, 6 miles to Bethlehem. This is where it happens, right? And so they start following this star, right? They start following the star because the star wasn't guiding them up until this point, or they wouldn't have stopped at the palace. And so the star is leading them, and it leads them to the place where Jesus is. And it says when they saw the star, they were overjoyed, filled with joy. Like joy was the outcome of what was happening. They saw the star in pursuit of Jesus. It stops over the house. Like, man, this is what I'm talking about. Joy is happening right there in that moment. I think joy is something we're all chasing, isn't it? I think joy is something, especially in this season. Like, man, we want to experience joy. We want to experience that feeling. And sometimes it's nostalgic for us. We want to feel that Christmas spirit, sometimes is the phrase that we say. But it's joy. We're chasing joy. We want joy in our lives. But we don't want just Christmas joy. We want joy 365, right? Like that's the kind of joy we want. You know, I've read a bunch about this particular moment in the story of Jesus. And there are people that have tried to explain, how does a star lead you 6 miles and stop over a residence so that you know that it's in that house? I mean, I don't know if y'all have ever looked at the stars at night. It's kind of hard to figure out which house. You can be under a bunch of houses and it looks like that star's under all. I don't know if y'all are aware of those things, right? But for some reason, they think this star is over this one particular place. And so people have talked about, well, it was a comet. It was a comet. That's what happened. It was a comet, and this comet, or it's a meteor. And this meteor, I don't know, would it crash in their backyard? And what happened? You know what I'm saying? No, the explanation is really simple. It was a miracle. There's no other explanation, right? There's no other explanation. Look, here, the bigger miracle to me is that this prophet prophesied the podunk town 400 years in advance and was right. Like that seems crazier than God allowed this light that they identify as a star to guide them to this house 6 miles from Jerusalem to there. Like that makes that's a doable thing. But just let's go back to Micah and how did you get podunk Bethlehem 400 years in advance? Like that's what I want to know. Like come on, that's how you win the lottery. You know what I'm saying? Like that's good. That's good to know. Verse 11, on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So verse 1 gives us the clue that this was after the birth of Jesus. Verse 11 confirms it, right? Because the birth of Jesus happens in a stable, a manger. This clearly states the Magi got there, they came to a house. House. Those two words don't get confused. And so I talk about this every Christmas. So some of you have already made your theological corrections. Just bear with me. There's plenty in here that need an adjustment, right? I need you to go home, and I need you to take your wise men out of your nativity scene, okay? Because they weren't there. They weren't there, right? Now here's the deal. In our house, our wise men are on the other side of the house. They sit on a shelf, okay? There are 3 of them. Matthew doesn't tell us there was 3, but we've only got 3 because there are 3 gifts, right? Who knows, right? But we got 3 of them. Right? And so they're on the other side of the house. Now, it just so happens that our wise men stayed up out of the box on the shelf all year this past year because they got a journey. They got a long ways to go. You know what I'm saying? It also could have been that we forgot to pack it up because you don't have it all in one thing and you pack it up and you get to another, you realize these go in the box I've already put in the attic and I'm not getting that stuff out again. And so they just sat there for a year. That might have been the actual reason, right? But I'm going to tell my kids that it was because we're theologically correct. Right? That's what we're doing. And so all of you need to make an adjustment, okay? Let's not tell our kids something that Matthew doesn't, the Bible doesn't say, right? There are no wise men in the manger. In fact, I'll just be honest with you. You keep your wise men in the manger, it's like you smack in the face of God. Don't do that. I'm kidding. Kind of. Take your wise men out of the manger. It says they get to the house and they saw the child with his mother Mary. They bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These guys are blowing me away. Let me try to get you to do a mental exercise real quick. Let's pretend that you haven't heard anything else about this story, that I haven't told you anything this morning. Let's pretend we haven't read the first 10 verses already. And let's pretend you know nothing about the Christmas story, if that's just nothing. And the only thing you're going to get is verse 11, okay? So I'm going to read verse 11 to you, and I'm going to ask you a question about just verse 11. You don't know anything else. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They come to the house, they see the kid, their immediate reaction is worship, and then they bring and give him gifts. So if you knew nothing else about the Christmas story, who is it at the house worshiping and giving gifts? Who is it? It's the people of God, right? The people that were waiting on Christmas. It was the people in Jerusalem. It was King Herod. It was everyone who's been waiting 400 years for this to happen. That's who goes to the house. That's who looks for Jesus. That's who finds Jesus. That's who worships Jesus. That's who gives gifts to Jesus. You know who's there in verse 11? None of the people of God. A bunch of guys from another country who had to actually come to the people of God's country and say, hey, this Christmas you've been waiting on, it's come. It's here. It's here. How did we get this wrong, people? I'm afraid we're doing the same thing. I'm afraid we're doing the same thing. I'm just trying to picture. I know what it's like to be a proud dad, right? I got a little boy and a little girl that I am so proud of. Man, when they do something, it's just like, God, this is so good. Hadley's had her first solo the other night in a Christmas concert. She sang, and I was like, golly, girl, yes. Man, goodness, you're so good. Can you imagine Mary as a mom? She's just doing normal things, right? She's probably like picking up the house. She just changed the diaper, right? Maybe she's, I don't know, she's cleaning out a cup or something. I don't know. She's watching soap operas. I'm not sure what she's doing. She's getting on Amazon to order something, and there's a knock at the door. She's like, I wonder who that could be, you know? And she goes and she gets dressed because moms don't wear anything, you know what I'm saying? It's not appropriate. So they got to, like, hold on, I'll be right there, you know? And they get all put together, right? And so open the door, and there's like a crew of freaking royal people. And they're like, hey, I know we don't look like we're from around here, because we're not, but we've come to see the baby that you're holding in your arms. And this star was a sign, and we know he's significant. And we learned from the palace folks that there's a Messiah that's going to be born here, and this star led us to you. And honestly, we can't talk anymore. We're just going to get on our knees, and we're going to start worshiping the kid that you're holding. And all of a sudden, these men are worshiping her baby. And then they finish with that, and they pull out this bag, or maybe it's boxes, just as they open their treasures, and they pull it out, and they present this mom holding this little kid with gold. You know? Gold. And frankincense and myrrh, like these ornate, lavish gifts. Man, they got it right. How do we get it so wrong? When I look at this story in chapter 2 of Matthew, there's 3 things that they teach me that I want to make sure I learn. The first thing that the Magi teach me is about finding joy. You know, why would the Magi even search for this king? Like, why is it even on the radar? Do we think, because that's what I think verse 10 tells us, it's 9 or 10, tells us that they saw a star and joy is a response. Like, joy happens because of what they're finding. And so when we think through that, do you think that they set out to find joy? Like, they were like, you know what, we need some joy in our life. Let's pack up a lot of treasures and let's go a number of miles over to Jerusalem, talk to the king, figure out where this star baby's born, because we're looking for joy. That's not what happened. No, they were looking for Jesus. They were searching for Jesus, and the byproduct, the outcome, the overflow was joy. That was the response. That's what happened as a result of it. Now, the thing is that what we need to learn is a lot of times we're searching for joy as well. But I think maybe the problem is that searching for joy is the wrong journey. But that's what we want. We want the Christmas spirit. We want joy. It's like, man, we're missing it. We can feel it kind of in our fingertips. We want what we used to feel. We want joy. That's what we're chasing down. But what we're not realizing is that you can't actually find joy. You can't find joy. But you can find Jesus. And the result of finding Jesus is joy. We don't find the results. We find the product. We find the thing that's important to us. We're all searching for it, though. We're all searching for it. We try to find it in all kinds of different things. We're trying to find joy. You know, it's like those psychopaths on TV that on Christmas morning surprise their significant other with a car, and they bought themselves a car too, and they didn't talk to the significant other. They're complete psychopaths for sure. Who does that? You know what I'm saying? Who does that? 2 cars, no conversation? Like, you know what I'm saying? I mean, if that is you, if you could add a 3rd to the list, that would be great. King Ranch, a little lifted, that'd be great. Apple CarPlay's a must. If you want it, I mean, if you're that, let's do it. You know what I'm saying? You know, I'm not hard to please. You know, we're chasing joy however we can. A lot of times that's what we convince ourselves of. We're going to buy it. We'll just swipe a card for joy, and that's what we'll get. But they show us something a little different. They said we won't find joy simply by searching for joy, because joy is the result, the outcome of following Jesus. The second thing that the wise men, these magi, teaches me is they remind me that we ought to be bringing gifts to Jesus. There's this song that's pretty popular at Christmas time. It's called Little Drummer Boy. And it's about this little kid that has the just incredible opportunity to be a part of Jesus' birth. And he knows this newborn king has been born. And so he's like, I got to bring a gift, right? But I don't have a gift to bring that's fit for a king. And so he kind of concludes. He's like, well, I got a drum, though, and so I'm going to bring my drum, and I'm going to play my drum for him. That's what I'm going to bring. And so he brings his drum, and the song says, I played my drum for him. I played my best for him. And that was the gift that he brought, right? And I think all of us have got to take that very same posture. It's like, okay, what do we bring into Jesus? And sometimes we talk ourselves out of it, like, well, we can't bring anything to Jesus, a worth or value. I think the drummer boy's onto something. It's a fictional, made-up guy, right? But I think the lesson there is very poignant. I think it's legit. Like, what can we bring to Jesus? We can bring our best. What is it you have? Let's bring that to Jesus. Because we look at it and we say, well goodness, even the Magi, the gifts they brought, what were they to Jesus? So they brought up a thing of gold. You know, Jesus already, he owns everything. He's the creator of the world, the Bible tells us. So he wasn't lacking for gold. He wasn't like shortchanged a little bit. He didn't need some spending money. He had plenty. Frankincense, this medicinal thing that was in that culture, was very medicinal and incredibly rare, but just huge when it comes to medicine. You're giving medicine to the great physician, the healer, the miracle man. You kidding me? Is that what he needs? Myrrh is something that happens that you use during a burial. He's going to be dead for 3 days. He didn't even need it. 3 days. He just brushes death off like it ain't nothing. He don't need myrrh. This is not a long time thing for him. He goes, gets the t-shirt, resurrects, conquers that thing, and says, move on out of here, death. It's been nice. Those gifts were nothing to him. You know what's something to him, though? That somebody thought enough to bring him. That was worth more than the gifts themselves. So what are you bringing to Jesus? Now, you might say, well, how do I bring a gift to Jesus? Like, okay, I get it. All right, so I got my drum. I know what my drum is. So in your terms, whatever your drum is, I say, that's great. Well, how do I find Jesus? Well, it just so happens Matthew, who's writing this book, he gives us an incredible gift. He actually tells us, there's a moment where Jesus is talking about giving gifts to himself. And he gives us incredible insight. This is what Jesus says. This is further on in Jesus' life. This is what Jesus says. He says, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. And the people that are listening to Jesus, they're like, Jesus, we never did any of that to you. You see a lot of people, you meet a lot of people, Jesus, so you probably thought that was me. Maybe I got one of them faces like, oh, I've seen you before, but Jesus, I've never done any of those things for you. And Jesus stops and he's like, no. That's what Matthew tells us he says. Jesus says, whatever you've done for the least of these, you've also done unto me. Yeah, so when we bring our gifts to Jesus by bringing them to others, we bring our gifts to Jesus by bringing them to others. When we bring them to the least of these. And so if you begin to look back on your Christmas season 21 days from now, and you take a look and you see that you have given nothing to the least of these, there's a pretty good chance you've given nothing to Jesus. So what are you bringing to Jesus? The third big thing that these magi teach me, it's really in the form of a warning. I don't want to be Jerusalem. I don't want to be King Herod. You see, they had missed Christmas altogether. Christmas had happened. Christmas had taken place, but they had no idea. They were completely unaware. Completely unaware. Let's not be the people that discover Christmas 2 years after it happens. And only because someone else comes and lets us know a king has been born. Well, let's not be those people. Come on. I don't want to wake up in January and have missed the magic of Christmas. I don't want to miss it. I don't want you to miss it. I don't want you to have to wait and hope for it to come around again next year. I want to talk about this in 2 particular ways as we wrap up. First is, if you've never discovered Christmas, if you've never discovered Jesus, if you've never decided, man, I want to give my entire life to Jesus. I don't want Christmas just one day a week, 25th of December, but I want Christmas all year long. I want the joy that comes with Christmas. I want the joy that comes with discovering and finding Jesus. If that's you, let's begin a conversation. Let's begin a conversation this season. Let's begin a conversation today. And we want to make that as easy as possible for you to begin that conversation. We know that sometimes spiritual questions are intimidating because maybe you don't even feel like you know the right questions to ask. So we want to make it as anonymous as possible for you to begin that conversation. You just simply text the word begin to the number we're going to throw on the screen. That's it. You text the word begin, there's going to be an automated response that just comes back and says, hey, tell me what you're thinking. And after you respond to that question, you just say, hey, these are my questions. This is what I'm thinking through. This is, I'd like to consider giving my life to Jesus. I want to know more about these questions. After you put in what you're writing about, after you text begin, just the word, there'll be an automated thing, and you answer that automated question that comes to you. From then on, our pastors pick it up, and it's live texting from there. Right? And so if you've got questions, we'll start answering those. And it's anonymous. We have no idea unless you put your name in there, right? Which you can do that. Or you can just remain anonymous and just a random phone number. And we will sit and we'll text back and forth with you the rest of the day. If you want that texting conversation to graduate to an in-person conversation, we can do that too. If you want to just say, hey, I'd like to talk today. And that's all. I want to begin a conversation. I don't want to text. I want to talk to someone. We'll talk with you after the gathering. Let's out. Or shoot, we've got Jason or Brooke. They'll go meet you in the lobby right now and begin that conversation. Our baptistry, we had a baptism at 9. At the 9 o'clock today. If you say, hey, you know what? I want this Christmas to be different. I want this to be my first Jesus Christmas. You want to give your entire life to Jesus? If you want to follow in his steps and be baptized today, we have everything that you need. Towels, the whole thing. Whole thing. Shirts, clothes, the whole thing. You just text that number. We'll get started on it. The second crew of people are those of you who are longtime followers of Jesus. And I think this is really important for us to make sure at the beginning of the Christmas season we're having this conversation. Because the truth is, Christmas is magical, especially when our Christmas is about Jesus. Christmas is magical, especially when our Christmas is about Jesus. So let me speak to you, those of you who lead families. If you lead a family, zero in with me real quick. It is your responsibility. It's your responsibility to be on purpose and intentional about how you are going to have Jesus as a part of your Christmas. It's no one else's. Now, someone else might do it for you, but they shouldn't have to. If you lead a family, you need to start thinking about it. And don't let it just drift into December 25th and say, oh, it's Jesus' birthday. This is cool. No, start thinking about it. Ask yourself the question, what are the things I should... Now, you can get help. I'm just saying lead the conversation. If you're leading your family, lead the conversation. And say, hey, let's look through the things that we're doing. How is Jesus a part of what we are doing as a family? How is Jesus a part of our Christmas? And that's on you, leaders. If you've got little kids and you're wondering, like, man, I don't know where to start. Right? They're too little. Like, they just don't understand it, whatever it is. I mean, we've got a Parents of Foundation Kids Facebook page. And it is full of resources, full of them for this particular season and how to help kids in whatever stage of life they're in, as little to as big as they got, to help them make sure that Jesus is a part of this Christmas season. And so you just hop on Facebook. If Facebook, like, I want to do Facebook, Robin will meet with any of you. If any of you want to have, Robin's our kids' first director, if any of you want to have a conversation about your particular kids' stage of life and where they're at and how old they are and how to integrate Jesus into your Christmas tradition and season, she will meet with you and she will give you resources. She'll point you in the right direction. She'll equip you with whatever you got. I promise. If there's just two of you at home, you're like, hey, our kids are gone, or we don't have kids, whatever it is, and we want to have conversation. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how you can make Christmas there. If it's just you, you're just by yourself this year, right? Let's talk about it. If you're struggling, like, how do I make Jesus a part of my Christmas? Let's talk about it. Our church puts out some collective corporate type things where we have Christmas Eve gatherings. That's a big part of it. We have the parade. We have the concert. We had the event with the community. We've got a huge serving opportunity coming up, not this Friday, but the next Friday, where we're going to be helping families with gifts through Christmas in Coweta with Bridging the Gap. There's opportunities to serve and to make sure that Jesus is a part of what you're doing. Look on the app. There's a trillion opportunities for you to jump in and start serving. But if you need a conversation, let's have a conversation. Christmas is magical. It really is. Especially when your Christmas is about Jesus. And that is doable. That is doable. Doesn't matter what your financial situation is. Doesn't matter what context your family is currently in this season. All of the other pieces that add to who we are, none of those things impact the magic of Christmas when Jesus is a part of it. I don't want to be like Jerusalem. I can't be like Herod. I'll settle for the guys in verse 11. Search for Jesus and end up finding joy. When they see him, they worship him. And they bring him the very best gifts of what they got. I just want to be a magi.